Okay, we are live. Welcome into a Euro 2020, actually happening in 2021 preview. I am the real underscore G Warner on Twitter. Make sure you hit the follow button on that social media platform. Also here, subscribe, do all those sort of things. Would love for more people to be following what I'm putting together, answer some questions, et cetera, et cetera. If you have any of those, again, go to the real underscore G Warner on Twitter and I will answer whatever you got. Today's episode, the plan is to go through Euro 2020 happening in 2021, but to go through the squads and have a little bit of futures look ahead to see kind of what these teams are going to do before I have what's hopefully a stream before each match day coming up to discuss actual in-game lines. I've not looked at those yet, but I have made mine for the entire 3 match days, and then also looking at futures, et cetera, et cetera. Tournament starts Friday. It's Tuesday, the 8th of June in the U.S., where I'm recording this. Going to go through kind of each squad, try to come up with some strategies to back them, fade them, and then kind of who I'm looking at to be a potential look for winners, et cetera, et cetera. So we're a minute in. I'm going to go group by group based on my expected order of starting Group A. Italy looks like a really big favorite, especially playing 3 matches at home. That's pretty important. There are going to be some crowd issues with COVID and limitations. It seems to me Eastern Europe is going to be a lot more maverick, or they're going to have a lot more fans in their stadiums than a lot of Western Europe and other places. But it seems like there's not going to be full crowds everywhere, to say the least. Some certainly more than others, but I think playing at home is important, especially for travel and establishing a home base. So Italy, with 3 matches at home, I have taken Group A as likely big favorites, followed by Switzerland, Turkey, and then Wales rounding up, finishing in 4th. Now, top 3 in most of these groups go on. Only 2 third-place teams will not advance. So pretty much everyone should be moving along here, and that makes it really not that worth it to play 2 advanced lines, which I think is something that's really fun to do in the World Cup, as they're still only taking 16 of 32. Here, taking 16 of 24 means that most are giving odds to advance, which is not really what I want to do. And then when you look at the teams that are getting odds, they're the bottom of the entire tournament. So based on that kind of projected order of finish, Switzerland finishing 2nd is someone that I would like to attack because I don't think their offense is very good. I think Turkey was playing really well in World Cup qualifying, which weirdly happens before this tournament, but that's what happens in a pandemic, I guess. I think Turkey's played really well. They can certainly score goals, and I'm not sure that Switzerland is able to do that. I think their defense is better than Turkey's, as I think that's where Turkey is vulnerable. But ultimately, I don't see where the goals come from on the Swiss team. But I do want to go through the favorites, Italy, and kind of go through the strengths and weaknesses. I think it's pretty clear. I was looking for projected starting 11s, but I think that's going to change game by game or match by match, of course, and also might be tough to even project right now based on injuries and COVID swirling through a bunch of these camps. But Donnarumma should be the goalkeeper. Don't have much of a concern there, as he's a great player and is looking for a big contract, and I'm sure is going to be plenty motivated, as all of these players will be. I think goals are going to be the biggest problem for Italy. I think their defense is going to be solid. And I think Mancini, their manager, has shown that he knows what he's doing. Ciro Immobile seems to be the best option for scoring goals up front. But he was really good 2 seasons ago, lockdown season for Lazio, but a lot of those goals came from the penalty spot. Wasn't so good this last campaign. There are some decent options off the bench, and then Lorenzo Insigne, who seems to be great at scoring from long distance. So that's really important. In terms of their midfield, I think Jorginho is going to be really important for adding a defensive midfielder. And then Barella had a great season for Inter, as did a lot of the other players. They do have some kind of age questions in the defense, with likely Bonucci and Chiellini as their starting center backs. And then that's a partnership that's worked for a very long time. And I think on an international stage where goals are going to be at a premium, I think that they're probably trustworthy enough, especially with 3 home matches, to trust them to win the group. Now, I do really like Turkey, and I think they have been playing really well. It's certainly possible that there's a bit of a drop off coming in here, and I do have some questions about their defense. But I'm looking to see if I can back them as much as possible this tournament, as I do expect them to advance, as most teams should, out of the group stage at least, and then likely will be rated as an underdog against almost everyone they play. A neutral against Switzerland should be interesting, but I would imagine they'd be an underdog there, and I'll still be very interested. Looking at their goalkeepers, that seems to be a little bit of a question. I would imagine Mert Günok would be starting. He's from Başakşehir, and certainly had some issues in the Champions League against Manchester United that comes to mind. And then other defenders, Çelik, who won Ligue 1 with Lille, is a great player. Demiral in the middle, and then Kabak, who's been a question and I think has some injury concerns as well, as another center back. But likely, I think you get the temperamental Kaglar Soyuncu from Leicester, who sits in there as well. So they do have bodies that people know. Their wingbacks, I think, are going to be pretty strong with Çelik, and then maybe Mert Muldur from Sassuolo, who's more of an offensive player, I think. And I think that's the biggest question, is how much offense are they going to sacrifice to play defense, or vice versa. But ultimately, I really am so surprised that Burak Yilmaz, who basically won League for Lille, did not get player of the year. I mean, Mbappe is the best player for sure, but didn't win the title, whereas Yilmaz literally carried them on his back. Maybe he runs out of legs here as a 35-year-old or so, at least an older player. But and certainly there's no one that's so impressive in the midfield. Okay Yokushlu from Celta de Vigo, and then transferred to West Brom to see them get relegated. He's probably going to be one of their main defensive midfielders, but he's also got a temper, to say the least. But then the creativity of Hakan Çalhanoğlu, I'm going to be really good at pronouncing these for the rest of this show. But I think he's a great creator, Çalhanoğlu. And then you also have Cengiz Ünder, who played really well in the Turkish uniform, didn't get much of a chance at Leicester City. I think he's going to be pretty important, along with Enes Ünal, who can play kind of as a reserve forward, who can come on and score goals, certainly, if he's coming on, or maybe in a starting kind of tandem, or one guy starts, one guy doesn't, with Kenan Karaman from Dusseldorf. Anyway, I think Turkey's a little bit under the radar here, and looking forward to backing them as much as possible. Whereas Switzerland, I think they've got a really famous goalkeeper in Jan Sommer, who is far more comfortable playing out of the back than anyone who's ever bet on Borussia Mönchengladbach and actually watched him try to kick the ball. Who thinks he's an outfield player and takes a lot of chances. I don't really like back heels from keepers to try to keep the ball or deceive an opponent, as it a lot of times can end up in the goal. But I do think that their defense is a lot stronger than their offense. I wonder, because Embolo is great speedster, but I'm not sure there's going to be a ton of open field against Switzerland, knowing their limits on their ability to score. I think most of their opponents will come in there and try to kind of shut the field down as much as possible. Other real attackers like Seferovic, I'm not sure is everyone can rely upon too much. Mehmedi was a backup for Wolfsburg. And so then you really look at the midfield about what's going to happen there. I think Granit Xhaka is an important captain who plays a lot better for his national team than he does anywhere else, specifically for Arsenal. And then Zacharias, who was a big time, speculation that he was going to move to a big club until he got injured a couple seasons ago. He's more of a defensive player. And then I think Xherdan Shaqiri is going to be kind of a roamer from the midfield or slash forward, who's going to really benefit their attack, but didn't get a ton of time on the pitch for Liverpool. And they're such a great club and have so much talent. So maybe that's why. But ultimately, I think goals are going to be tough for them. And I'm not sure their defense is even that good. Akanji was great for Dortmund, but they had a pretty poor defensive record. Nico Elvedi, same sort of thing for Gladbach. Good player, played all the time, but they didn't play great defense this season. And I think there's going to be some issues over there as well. So that's my kind of take on Group A. I guess I haven't gone through Wales enough yet either. I think Gareth Bale is the name that jumps out to everybody for Wales. But besides him, there's some big questions. Deno James is great speed from Manchester United, is certainly important. But like, has he ever really done enough in his career to be relied upon on this type of stage? I'm not sure. And then I think there's going to be a lot of issues in the defense. Davies and Rodon from Tottenham are at least some names that you might know, but I'm not sure that they're really good enough to keep goals out. Nico Williams, still a really young player for Liverpool as well. And then some other players that aren't really Premier League level. And I think there's a bias to Premier League players anyway. So I think Wales do finish bottom, and that'll crash them out of the tournament. But very interested in seeing how Turkey is lined, and we'll certainly keep an eye on all sort of that. Moving to Group B, Belgium, clear favorite. And a big benefit also is if you take the 1 seed in Group B, C, E, and F, you face a third place finisher. Group A, unfortunately, Italy, when they likely win the group, they'll have to face a second place team, which is a little bit disappointing. But in some of these divisions, especially the Group of Death, Group F, the third place side is not going to be too much worse than the second. But anyway, Belgium as the number 1 FIFA ranked team, however much that matters, certainly dealing with some injuries and have some questions with Kevin De Bruyne, who I don't know if he's going to play in the opener, but should be back for, I guess, when this tournament gets really serious. Still got to think about Courtois in the goal, who's probably one of the most trustworthy of all keepers in this tournament. The defense is a little bit older, but they've got plenty of solid names and backups if there are injuries to some older players like Alderweireld and Vertonghen. But ultimately, Belgium had a pretty good performance, I think, against Croatia. Didn't start very well, but then controlled a lot of the match. And Lukaku is just unguardable at this point. He's big, he's fast, he finishes everything. If it falls to him anywhere, any sort of goal scoring position, he finds the net. And so that's something that not a lot of these teams have. But I think offense is going to be a big problem throughout this tournament. Without De Bruyne, maybe his chances are less. But as soon as that comes, you got to really pay attention to De Bruyne, what he can create. Then you certainly have Hazard off the bench, Eden Hazard, because there's 2 of them. He certainly can come in and score. I'm not sure that he's going to play a ton of minutes, as he didn't do that for Real Madrid over the last 2 seasons, really. But then Mertens is always a great creator as well. I think a lot of those players really want to create for themselves rather than passing to Lukaku. But Lukaku's still one of the biggest threats out there. And then there are some good backups that can certainly come on the pitch and cause some havoc. I think when you look at the midfield, they do have some good defensive midfielders like Den Donker, who I think has done a pretty good job for Wolves about being kind of in the middle and as an enforcer will take a tackle or foul someone if he needs to. But also Tielemans have shown a little bit more offensively, I think, on his national club national side as opposed to for the club for Leicester, but had the big goal in the FA Cup to win it. And I think there's still some strong ability also with Yannick Carrasco, who did so well for Atleti on the wing as well. So I think Belgium are probably the far and away favorites, but they have to play on the road this entire tournament. Since there's so many hosts, it's hard to say exactly how that matters. But Denmark, who I think finished the second, will have 3 home matches. Russia, who I've picked to finish third, will have 2, with that third match being in Copenhagen against Denmark. And then last place is likely Finland, who have shown that they can be a little bit of a pass to nuisance with Timo Pukki, who's able to score seemingly. He's their only way to score, but he does it, and to give him credit for that. The rest of their squad's not great. Radetzky, the goalkeeper from Leverkusen, should be an important piece for them, as he'll be under threat quite a bit during this tournament. I'm not sure that they have enough to get out of 4th. But then looking at second place matters a little bit. So Denmark, I think, are a perfect defensive side that could be really tough as an underdog. But I'm not sure that I really want to back them too much as a favorite, because they're going to struggle to score. Their defense is built pretty strong, and they have a really good midfield as well. But their forwards, I think, is where their biggest problem is. Braithwaite can score for Barcelona for sure, but that's usually a lot because everyone's focused on Griezmann and Messi and even De Jong and others from the midfield. I'm not sure that he's been able to do that so much on an international level. And then Cornelius for Parma got relegated, didn't have a great season. Scovolson's pretty young. Yusuf Poulsen had a really good finish to beat Neuer near post in a recent friendly, but he's really wasn't playing too much for Leipzig and kind of fell out of in a team that really needed to score goals. And I don't think that he was really looked at as a goal scorer. Kasper Dolberg, still really young, but did play quite a bit for Nice and might even be a good idea to see him play more than Poulsen. But we'll see if that happens, especially because Poulsen's been in the side for so long that I imagine that they'll kind of trust him and trust what they have and what they know. Moving on to Russia, I think their defense and their age of their defense is going to be a big question. They also don't have like the incredible crowd support. I guess they do in 2 of the matches, but in the World Cup it was insane what they're getting and how much more they were running than all their opponents. And some suggested there was some doping involved. I'm not going to say that, but that's probably true. I think goalkeeper for Russia is a little bit of a question. They've gone a little bit younger and looks like Shunin will be the guy. I thought Akinviv might even get this spot, but it's not even on the roster, according to the NBC Sports page that I'm looking at in the background. That's probably why I'm not always looking at camera, to say the least. But I think we know their defenders. They're strong, tall, big, fierce, will certainly put in tackles. I think that's an expectation for a Russian soccer team. But Mario Fernandez getting older on the wing, I wonder how much that affects his speed. I think certainly easier to trust them than young players. You don't really know what you're going to get from. But I think the goal scoring talent on this team is incredible. Artem Zuba might be one of the best striker, scoring threats. Not on a Lukaku level, but honestly, like in terms of what he means to his team, is probably just as important. Huge player, like 6'5", 6" or something like that. Really tall, especially on a soccer pitch. And then he does have a lot of attacking talent surrounding him that can kind of set him up. That I think he'll really force 2 defenders, 2 center backs to really play him, which will give a lot of space to the Moranchuks and others. I guess they have Alexei as a forward listed here, but then Golovin, who played really well for Monaco, who were great this season, Cheryshev on the wing. I think there's a lot of offensive attacking talent for Russia, and that'll make them a decent favorite potentially. But I'm not sure that they'll be one very much in this tournament because they're playing on the road at Denmark, so that'll probably be an underdog. Against Belgium, I can't imagine they'd be favorites even at home. And then they'll probably be a pretty big favorite against Finland. And then you got to really decide how much they're going to score if they can cover that big number potentially. But so that's Group B. I think pretty safe to say that Belgium will move through as the number 1 seed, or will win the group, even though they're not getting any home matches and have been already whining about that to the press. Plus, the De Bruyne injury does make things a little bit more questionable. You never know because there's so many teams that want to advance, but I think the path especially is important to Belgium. So you should see a pretty good effort in the group stage for them to win the group. Denmark and Russia will be a good fight for second. I think Denmark getting 3 home matches is a big deal. But Russia being able to score, we'll see how much Denmark can really combat or can score to keep up with Russia. And then Finland, like I said, I expect to be bottom of the group. Moving to Group C, looks like Netherlands group as they have 3 matches at home, though Frank de Boer has been an awful manager. I guess supposedly unlike his talent as a player on the actual pitch with kicking the ball himself. The planning hasn't ever worked. He's gotten crashed out of a bunch of jobs, I think, including Atlanta United in the MLS, not Atalanta. But 3 matches at home is pretty important. Ukraine, I think, is the belle of the ball in this group as the young team that people have high expectations for. But I was surprised to see that Austria was not on the same level. That Austria was picked to potentially even finish above Ukraine. I have some real questions about Austria, and a lot of that's around their defense. It's a squad full of Bundesliga players, which, like, I think the Bundesliga is a decent league and certainly fun to watch, but I'm not sure that defense has come close to what it needs to be on an international level. It's really struggled, a lot of the German teams, to defend in Champions League and the Europa League. And this team has a big issue at goalkeeper where no one's really sure who's, I think, going to be there. Bachmann got his international debut in the last match. Wasn't bad at all, I don't think, against England. But then Schlager was playing before, made some big mistakes. I don't know. We'll see what happens there. But then David Alaba, always one of the probably the best player this nation will ever see, potentially. I mean, I know I'm selling short the future, but he's been awesome and is so versatile, which is really important. Problem is that he's never really unleashed because he's got to help out the rest of the club, really, or the rest of the side. I think that there's plenty of mistakes in Marco Friedel, who just got relegated for Werder Bremen. Hinteregger is a solid guy at the back, but is probably going to pick up yellow cards and get suspended from one of these matches on yellow card accumulation if they get that far. Likely the third place team does move through in this group, though, so that's not too big of an issue. But Liner, really small left or wing back, will probably get attacked quite a bit. And I think there's plenty of Bundesliga talents on this team, but I'm just not sure how well they match on the global stage. In terms of forwards, I think Kalajic has to be the starter here. I saw some projections that had Arnautovic from China coming in, but I'm not sure that that'll happen. Goals, I think, are going to be a real struggle for Austria, and if they can't keep goals out of the back of the net, it's going to be really hard for them to score enough to get enough points to challenge for that second place spot. So I'm pretty interested in Ukraine. I think Ukraine's a little bit less known based on a lot of players being in the Ukrainian league. But I think Zinchenko has shown for Manchester City that he's been pretty important, even starting the Champions League final. And I think it will be captaining the side. They've gotten some work for young goalkeepers. So there's a bit of a goalkeeping controversy there potentially, or competition. But I think having two goalkeepers in this type of tournament is decent if one doesn't play well. Certainly there's if you have two quarterbacks, then you have none argument from the NFL and American football. But ultimately, I think it's good to have depth in this type of tournament because you never know what's going to happen, especially with COVID. In terms of the defense, I think that's their biggest issue, and getting kind of a belief that they're going to do enough defensively. But I think Austria have those same issues. And then in terms of the midfield, I think Malinovsky has shown for Atlanta that he's one of the scarier players to play against. And they're a little bit under the radar, I guess. I mean, I'm happy to see that, but I guess I'm a little bit surprised they weren't getting as much respect from odds makers. So that's something that I'd maybe potentially look at to finish top two or something like that if they're somehow catching odds in some sort of fashion. But ultimately, or maybe even to pick them to go further than Austria would be something that I'd be interested in looking at. We'll see what Yarmolenko can bring, but I think he's one of their better threats up front, and hopefully he's back fit, available, and will be out there quite a bit. Now, the bottom of the group, North Macedonia, I don't think is as bad as everyone thinks, and they're big plus money to advance. But I think it's hard for them to finish third here in a pretty decent group overall. But I don't think that Austria is really that much better. I mean, North Macedonia certainly have the smallest team or the least known players, but have Alioski, who's certainly up and down for Leeds, but like pretty well known and was playing quite a bit for them. Then you also have to think about Bardi, who's a great creator for Levante in the Spanish league. Elmas playing for Napoli, didn't play as much later in the season, but I think is still important. And then Goran Pandev has always been the greatest attacking threat. I don't see him included on this roster, which I don't know what happened or if that's a mistake, but that would be a big change because he's certainly old, but he's been a great scoring threat for them. So I'll have to look into that deeper. But I don't think that they're that much worse than Austria, to put it that way. They're certainly going to be an underdog everywhere based on that number to advance, but we'll see what happens. And I will have to check on Pandev to make sure that I didn't miss that or that wasn't a mistake. So that's Group C. I think Netherlands will win behind 3 home matches, but I don't think they're very good. And I'm really interested in being against them as much as possible, especially if they're overpriced as a big favorite a lot in this tournament. Then I have Ukraine finishing second, narrowly ahead of Austria, which might be a little bit different than the market's expecting. And then North Macedonia finishing last. England, I think, will win Group D. 3 home matches, pretty important. Scotland with 2 home matches have to travel to Wembley, I believe, but that's still pretty important for what's looking like a bottom side in this group. The other 2 are Croatia and Czech Republic, who have some whatever. Croatia, they were really great, finishing second in the World Cup, but this team is getting a lot older. They still have a lot of those bodies. I thought played Belgium pretty tightly this past weekend, but had some trouble scoring, and I'm not sure that that's going to be a new problem for them or one that they can get over. I think that will stick around because like watching Pekovic up front was not very impressive. Ante Budimir did some pretty good goal scoring for Osasuna in La Liga. I'm not sure how much time he'll get. Kramaric was an up and down season, starting really hot and end of last season in lockdown, but hasn't really taken off as much in international play from what I've seen. Rebic, certainly another good attacking threat. So I think they have enough players, enough quality, enough talent. But putting that together and getting the ball in the net is going to be an issue, I think, for this side. They've got plenty defensively. Sledasar coming in, I think, to start because Lovren doesn't look healthy is okay. I mean, I think he had a decent season, played all the time for Marseille. That's important. Versalka on the wing, it looks healthy after missing most of the season for Atleti. And then I don't know what to say more about Vida. He doesn't ever seem to get talked about highly enough, but he's always playing for Croatia, is always there making the tough tackle or making a good clearance. So I have some belief in them for sure. Goalkeeper is pretty young from Livakovic, I believe, from Zagreb, but looked pretty good in Europa League stuff. And I think Kovacic coming back in the midfield makes that really strong. Brozovic in the middle is always good, and Modric is the creator that I think a lot of teams in this tournament will miss. So I like Croatia. I think they're in a position where they're looked on a little bit lower than I think they should be. They certainly aren't perfect, and they're definitely aging. And I wonder what this tournament will do and how their legs will hold up if they're going to need to make some more changes. Maybe not play Modric as much, substitute him, et cetera, et cetera. But I think I really like their opportunity in this group, as I don't think England is that strong. Jordan Pickford being what looks like the clear number one is an issue, as I think he's always got mistakes in him, and who knows? I mean, he's intense, he tries hard, but I'm not sure that that's enough. In terms of forwards, the scariest position I think for anybody is going against, besides Romelu Lukaku, is Harry Kane, who's awesome. But around him, I question. Mason Mount had a really great season, but hasn't really seemed to fit into the international side as much as I would have expected. Rashford's very up and down. Saka's so young. Sancho, who had a pretty good end to the season for Dortmund and bringing them to Champions League, which was like required for them to keep people and actually pay salaries. But there's a little bit that's left to be desired, in my opinion, especially with the Harry Maguire injury. I'm not sure about his status, but in the middle without him, having a Connor Cody Tyrone Mings is certainly a downgrade. Who knew Maguire was so important, but he was pretty important to Manchester United, and then looked like he's been pretty important to the English side as well internationally. So I have some questions about England. They look to be the clear favorite to win the group. And I think that's based on playing a lot of their matches at home, which is a huge advantage, especially because I think they'll have some pretty full crowds. And might even, if they win the group, have their first round match in London, which would be a huge advantage and seems kind of rigged in my opinion. But I'll leave that behind. So then moving along to Czech Republic, who have shown under their manager Silhavi that they're going to press forward and press high. Did it against Germany in international friendlies over the season, did it again, got blasted by Italy, but I think we're almost the better side and had two deflections that went against them, and we're suddenly down 2-0, lost by a much more lopsided score. But Vaklik in as a goalkeeper is someone you can trust. They didn't play much for Sevilla this season, more because Bono was played so well while he was injured, and Lopetegui didn't want to change as a former goalkeeper himself. I think Czech Republic and West Czech United pretty much with bringing Soufal and also Souček to West Ham from Slavia Prague have been awesome in the Premier League. I think that's shown that they can play and compete on a level with the rest of the world. And to be honest, I think Slavia Prague did really well in Europa League as well to knock out Leicester and keep advancing as well as you did before getting obliterated by Arsenal. But there's plenty of other things that were going on behind the scenes there. I think in terms of their side, they're going to try to press forward as they've done that against everybody, and that's going to leave their defense in a little bit of a question mark, but I think they almost have to do that because their offense is the problem. Patrick Schick had a pretty poor year. Vidra, I think, was pretty good as a backup striker for Burnley, but I'm not sure how much he's going to really play a role as a starter or be on the pitch for that much for Czech Republic, and he's going to need some time to be able to score. In terms of the midfield, I think there's some decent players, but none that are really going to change games, and I think that's probably why they're going to be spending a lot of energy and really using those 5 subs as much as they can to try to press as high as possible. We'll see what happens with that side, but I think the big question is who's going to advance between them and Scotland. Croatia and England look pretty safe in my opinion, though you never know. But I think Scotland with 2 home matches is pretty important. Their only road match being in England is probably one you're not expecting to get any points from anyway. So if they can take care of business at home and get some points against Croatia, or potentially even if they can beat Czech Republic, that's probably enough for them to move on. I wonder if that's going to mean they play a little bit differently and kind of decide a lineup that really features the best they can for that one. But I know they've had some issues with COVID going through their ranks, but as far as I can see, everyone's been cleared. I think it was only Fleck that was held out for testing positive. Going to have to check those over the next coming days. But I think scoring goals is going to be an issue for them. I don't really see many from their forwards, but they did a good job getting a goal against Netherlands, who I think is really unimpressive, getting 2 actually. Both are pretty good goals. One was off a high press turnover, and that's probably something that they're going to be doing. I imagine their defense is going to be Liam Cooper in the middle, and then McTominay is either going to play center back or play as a defensive midfielder, then with Tierney on the wing, I think, and then Robertson from Liverpool is always their captain and their best player. So I think their defense can stand up pretty well. As an underdog at home would be interesting. I'm not sure how much they will be in as a host, but I think them against Czech Republic are a pretty big competition to see who advances. And at this point, I think initially I expected Scotland to be the team that will be bounced out of the tournament, or expected that's what odds makers to make it. I think at this point that might be a toss up. And I think with Scotland at home, I almost want to favor them. So we'll see if the Czechs, how well they play. And I think it's going to be really determined, other than when they play head to head and they likely draw, which will make the performances against the other bigger nations to really decide who goes through. Group E. So Spain looks like a clear favorite here, despite COVID going through their team right now. I think Sergio Busquets, who had a test positive, but 3 home matches for Spain is a big deal. Poland keeps losing strikers. They still have Lewandowski, but the depth behind him is basically gone with Piaszczek out, and now Milik also out, that I saw today, I think. I think in terms of the rest of the group moving forward, Sweden is having some COVID issues right now. Imagine more of these are going to pop up as well, as I don't think any of these players are really vaccinated like we are in the U.S. Slovakia does seem to be the worst of the group and is less likely to advance. I think trying to figure out who's going to finish third, probably Sweden is next. I think I don't think Ibra is back, but he's not on the squad list I'm looking at. But Sweden, I think, has had some issues with their defense, and I don't really see that changes. Lindelof has shown, even on a Premier League level, that he's not been great. I think Pontus Jansson probably fits in Brentford's recent promotion to the Premier League, so they'll have like an all English domestically, all EPL defense. But I think their wings are pretty weak, and I don't know, or the wing backs, excuse me. In terms of creating goals, that's another issue where I don't think they're great. Kulusevski, I think, is out at least for the first match, maybe even more, due to testing positive for COVID. He's a young, I think, decent goal threat that they're going to really miss. Forsberg didn't have a good season for Leipzig, hardly played. And I think Svanberg had also tested positive, but they're waiting to see if that's a confirmed or like a false positive. Isak had a great season for Real Sociedad, but feels like he'll be out a little bit on kind of an island as the top striker. Quaison maybe can fit behind him and create some, but they've got some decent names and decent players for sure. Berg is an older player that could probably put a ball in a net, but ultimately we'll see how much they can keep out of their own before we start speculating how many they can score, because they'll probably based on their defense and that limit, they'll probably need to score some, but could be one of those third place teams that advance here. I think Poland is I think not as strong as a lot of people would expect or think they are because of Lewandowski being the kind of the head of the snake. He's a lot of times isolated and kind of left on his own. So they're going to need to do their best to try to get him in as much as possible. I think Milik being out is a problem. And then, as I said, Piatek being gone is going to limit to really Lewandowski having to carry the whole load. I think that's not too much of a surprise. That's kind of what he's always done. But the midfield, I mean, Mulder, who had a really big goal against England in a loss in a friendly, I think it was, during the season. He's looked decent for the international side, but hasn't done too much. Click, I think, was up and down for Leeds, to say the least, this season. Played a lot, but I think the real question is their defense with Glick, who played for Benevento, who were certainly in a relegation dogfight, kind of collapsed toward the end of the season. And a lot of that was because they couldn't keep balls out of the back of their net. Certainly has some issues scoring, though, so I don't know if that's all his fault. But he and Bednarek, who's nursing injury, who was relied upon a lot for Southampton, and there's a reason why they gave up so many goals. But then at goalkeeper, and not much more you can ask for, was Szczesny, and then Fabianski behind him, and Skorupski, who played all season for Bologna as well. So it looks like Poland has got a decent list of depth at goalkeeper. The problem is you don't play three of those on the field at a time, and I think their defense is going to be a question. So I'm not sure that they're the far and away guarantee second place finisher in this group. And ultimately, I think what that does is it really makes Spain's control that much more on this group, or makes it even less of a contest for them to win, which I think is big for futures. Though I think they would have to play a Group F side, the Group of Death team, in the next round or the first round of the knockouts. So last but not least, moving to Group F, I have France as I would pick them to win the tournament. If gun to my head, as I think they're most talented. Like, even the players they didn't bring to this event are still awesome. I think there's a good battle for first place, though, with Portugal. I think are really talented, have great defense, a lot of attackers, midfielders that can create. Germany, I think, is going to be really benefit. They're going to really benefit from 3 home matches, which is going to be really important. And then I don't think Hungary is that bad, but only having 2 matches at home, I mean, that certainly helps. But they're in a really, really big ask for them to try to get out of this group, as I don't think they'll do that. But I think they're decent. I think their club is a lot better, or their nation is a lot better than a lot of people give them credit for. But they're just up against the juggernauts in the Group of Death, and that's going to be really hard, especially I think Germany being the weakest of the other 3 teams, and they have to go to Munich for that match, and that's going to be a big issue. But in terms of who's going to get out of this group, I think France likely is probably the favorite to win the whole thing, just based on talent alone. I think that can change based on their road, but ultimately, Benzema coming back in the side is awesome, as he really carried Real Madrid on his back this season. So much talent all over the place. It's almost like looking at these names, it's so hard to even try to find who's going to play each match, because it's so hard to know. Lloris, I think, is still going to be the goalkeeper, though Magnan has certainly challenged him and looked like a great player this season for Lille. We'll be moving to Milan in the fall. And then defense is so strong. I mean, it's almost like, why am I even looking at France? They're so good. In terms of Germany, though, I think Jogi Löw has good thing that he's leaving, but he's still got his claws on this team for one more competition, and certainly will make some decisions that I don't think many people will agree with. Taking 2 forwards based on this squad list I'm looking at, Werner, who's unable to finish chances, certainly has an impact and makes defenders have to honor him, and that opens up the pitch for others. But maybe they can get something out of him. But he had such a poor season, has really shown that he has one move that he can go into the center of the box and kick with his right foot to the far post. That's about all he can do. Folland had a good year. I wouldn't be surprised if Werner, I guess I would be surprised if he doesn't play, but I don't think he should have like a stranglehold in a starting spot. Germany's really strong, but their defense, I think, is weaker. I think Rudiger will start after playing so well for Chelsea, especially in the Champions League final. Hummels, I think, had plenty of issues at Dortmund. Maybe not all his fault, but I think defense is where they can be had, depending if Ginter plays in a 3-man center backs, or 3-man back line, or if they go 4, which I think is what Jogi Löw wants to do. And I think he might be like, this is my last team. I'm picking this, and let Hansi Flick be there. But really, I think it'll be Hansi's team going forward, and this will be how Löw wants to do this last show. Neuer is going to be a great goalkeeper, going to do a lot to help the defense, which is important. But then looking in the midfield, plenty of great players. I'm just not sure. I mean, it's great to see Mueller back in the side, but he kind of needs Lewandowski to feed the ball to, and that's where the goals come from so often for Bayern Munich. I'm not sure that Werner or Volland are the type of guys that can really take too much from what he does. Sané's great in the wing, but really is a speed guy. I think ultimately it might be Mueller to Gnabry to be the best way for Germany to score. And I think the other teams in this group have a lot more options to try to get the ball in the net. Lastly, want to look at Portugal and just really kind of speak about where they're strong. Andre Silva had an awesome season for Frankfurt, who crashed out of a Champions League spot, but still got Europa League. And that was a pretty big deal for Frankfurt, getting their manager a new job and everyone all over leaving based on a really good season. I think getting lured away. Ronaldo, older, but still such a threat. Got a little bit of rest towards the end of the season because Pirlo wasn't playing all over the place, but that might be good for this tournament. Jota looks a little bit healthier after getting injured twice this season for Liverpool, and João Felix, fresh off the win with Atleti, is another great attacker. Looking at defense, you'd think if their offense is so strong, where's their weak point? I think Lopez in goal is still trustworthy with a decent amount of backups with Patricio and Silva behind him. In terms of defenders, I think Pepe is still looking young enough. Jose Font, also great season for Lille. They're older, but they've shown that they can do it still. And then Ruben Diaz is the best player in the Premier League, I think, and won Manchester City the Premier League title. All really important, all really solid at the back, and I think are going to be big parts of Portugal that potentially go deep in this tournament. I think that's about all I wanted to go through covering the teams specifically to really kind of get those thoughts out there. We'll try to go through and come up with some sort of match by match ideas later in the tournament. But pretty much, I think it's important also to look at some futures now, potentially on who will win the entire thing. I tracked from the beginning of the Premier League season pretty much in October, seeing kind of where the money has flowed. France has gotten bet a ton. Portugal, their odds have been cut in half, and I think both of those make a lot of sense. England's climbed a little bit. Belgium has climbed. Might be recently due to the De Bruyne injury, but I think it was also a little bit just not everyone loving Belgium as much as they had potentially before the Premier League season had started. Germany has dropped a little bit, but that doesn't really make a ton of sense to me, as they're in such a tough group. I don't think that they're in any threat of finishing last and having Hungary jump them, but there's too much a divide in talent between those countries. But I think it might be difficult, and Germany finishing in a third place position will put them facing a number one from another group, and that's going to be a problem for them, as it just makes the road a lot more difficult. In terms of looking for potential long shots that might move along, and it's hard to do, and really will take a little bit more for me to look at kind of where I expect teams to fit on the yellow brick road in the knockout stage. But that's going through each team. I hope everyone enjoys what they watch. Feel free to throw any questions in the comments here or on Twitter, @thereal_G Warner. I'm going to be going through and trying to get everything as much as possible and as detailed as possible there. Thanks for joining. Hope to see you for the next live stream before the tournament ends up beginning on Friday.